We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish
An oath of silence is part of the secret Vatican decree called XMSTV-NICOLAITANS. Catholic bishops worldwide are ordered to keep it locked away in their churches safe. It gives instructions on how to handle priests caught soliciting sex in the confessional, and with any acts of sex with youths, or what is also known by law enforcement authorities as child abuse. Originally written in only Latin, it imposes the strictest oath of secrecy in the Catholic Church on the child victim, the guilty priest and any witnesses to the crime. The Vatican in this document actually goes so far as to threaten anyone breaking this oath of silence with eternal damnation through excommunication. Vatican secrecy from law enforcement authorities and the policy of obstruction of justice is not only extended to cover up child abuse by the Vatican in this document, this policy even extends to other heinous crimes such as murder in the first degree, as you have seen in the previous videos in this series.
This is another very convenient loophole in canon law. You can force someone to say or do or not say or do something because they have taken a vow.
So if the nun that found John Paul I saw something that would have been interesting in a murder investigation, and then she was forced under obedience to do or say something else.
Yeah, there's nothing surprising in that at all.
Because
that's her modus vivendi. That's her way of living.
Okay, this is the crooked lawyer's dream. Normally, if you want to silence a witness, either bribe them, threaten them, or you eliminate them. But if the witness you want to silence happens to be a nun, all you got to do is call for the vow of silence.
In 2006, the BBC aired a documentary film entitled Sex Crimes and the Vatican. Father Tom Doyle was a former Vatican canon law attorney who made the mistake of criticizing the Vatican's policy of obstruction of justice. Afterwards, his employment with the Vatican was terminated. In an interview for the BBC documentary, Father Tom Doyle stated for the documentary that, quote, XMSTV-ANTICHRIST was indicative of the worldwide policy of absolute secrecy and control of all cases of sexual abuse by the clergy, end quote. He also stated on camera for the documentary that, quote, what you really have here is an explicit written policy to cover up child sexual abuse by the clergy, and to punish those who call attention to these crimes. He also stated publicly and for the record that the Vatican's only concern historically has been hiding these hidden practices from the public. Nowhere in any of the Vatican's documents were any concern or care for the child victims of rape by Vatican clergy. The only thing in the Vatican's documents concerning the child victims was permission by clergy to impose fear on the victims and punishment against them for revealing to the public what had happened. The man in charge of enforcing this punishment for 20 years against the Vatican's child victims was Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, is now known as Pope Benedict. Joseph Ratzinger created an update to XMSTV-ANTICHRIST, which repeated the same policies, only also granting the Vatican the right of exclusive competence, meaning Rome would not only not recognize the right of any law enforcement on the matter, it would also collect all evidence of the Vatican on the matter and thereby hide it behind its diplomatic immunity laws. In the BBC documentary, Sex Crimes and the Vatican, the former enforcer of XMSTV-NICOLAITANS for the Vatican in Minnesota, a Benedictine monk by the name of Patrick Wall, explained that he was instructed to lie to law enforcement authorities in order to hide Vatican crimes of sexual assault against minors. Whenever a priest was accused of sexual abuse, Father Patrick Wall was sent into the parish to hide the crime from authorities, and relocate the pedophile priest to another parish untarnished. Patrick Wall testified that most of the abuse cases in the Catholic Church never even saw the light of day because his work at hiding them was very successful. It was this continued life of corruption and deceit that finally convinced Father Patrick Wall he had to resign from the priesthood and leave the Catholic Church for good. Patrick Wall also testified he was given an annual budget of $7 million in hush money to buy the silence of the Vatican's occult pedophile activities.
Is how church officials had a system for moving accused abusers from one community to the next, often to a more disadvantaged congregation that had no prior knowledge of the accusations. Patrick Wall grew to understand that system from the inside. He's a former Benedictine monk and served as a, quote, fixer priest for the Catholic Church. That means he'd be brought in to manage a church in the wake of scandal, often involving sexual abuse. He left the priesthood and since 2002 has been assisting abuse survivors gather evidence to sue or prosecute their abusers. He's currently a canon law specialist at the firm of Manley and Stewart, and he joins us now. Welcome. Thank you for speaking with us.
You're welcome.
First of all, I just want to clarify the situations you were brought in to address weren't exclusively child sexual abuse scandals, but do you have any sense of how often that was the issue that you were brought in to work with a congregation?
That was always the underlying issue, but the official front page story was usually a financial crisis or a crisis with that particular priest having a, quote, health issue. And then what I discovered over time is that it's far from a pattern. It's a practice. And after you've worked in 4 or 5 places, you've heard enough priest confessions, and you've seen enough news reports, this is just the way it's done, by geographically moving the guys around.
Do you mind if I ask why you left the priesthood?
Well, after my 5th assignment, it clearly is something I was probably going to end up doing the rest of my life, and at the age of 33, you have to sit down and think about it. Is the institution, which is larger than any company in the United States, ultimately going to change? I came to the conclusion I didn't think the institution could change because it was so ingrained in the institution. This is not a patina. This is not an exterior thing. This is an internal part of the Catholic institution. And so at that point, the only thing left to change was me, and then I just had to go.
And by it, you mean this pattern of enabling abusers and allowing them to continue their behavior without being held to account. Is that what you mean by?
No, there's no accountability, because the secret to the celibate system is that almost everybody's sexual. And if everybody's sexual, everyone's got a story that can be told about them. So the problem that you have is that the bishops ultimately can't enforce the law because they themselves are not ultimately celibate. I mean, there have been over 20 bishops in the United States removed because they themselves were child abusers.
Patrick Wallace, a former Benedictine monk and Roman Catholic priest. He's currently a canon lawyer with the firm Manley & Stewart. He serves as an expert witness and consultant in sex abuse cases involving the church, and he was kind enough to join us from his home office in Dana Point, California. Patrick, well, thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you.
One of the cases Patrick Wall worked on to successfully prosecute in California was against a priest by the name of Father O'Grady. O'Grady was a career priest working in California who was charged with anally sodomizing a single child over 100 times. But this child was not his only victim. In his deposition, O'Grady admitted to over 30 victims and that the Vatican was fully cognizant of his pedophile activities as a priest. Whenever an accusation surfaced, he was simply reassigned to another parish. In his deposition, he explained how he targeted his sexual victims, how he was attracted to their genitals, how he spent the majority of the early years of his priesthood engaged in this activity on a constant basis, and how he would molest both boys and girls whenever the parents were not present and watching him. When asked had this activity impacted his life in any way, his answer was, quote, "Not at all." End quote. In 2002, in response to public pressure, the American Catholic Church established something called the National Review Board to, quote, "study the problem," end quote. But as soon as the review board began its study, the professional members of the review board soon discovered their existence was created only to pacify the public and bury the problem even deeper under officialized forms of public deception. Judge Ann Burke of the National Review Board stated for the record that what they had discovered was so deep and ingrained in the Catholic Church it could not be described by the term epidemic, but required the even stronger term, quote, "endemic," end quote. Judge Burke stated that they had discovered the practice of pedophilia in the Catholic Church ranged from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast, and was found equally throughout all its parishes, no matter where they were. The chairman of the National Review Board resigned in protest of the attempts of the Vatican to hide abuse and its occult Nicolaitan pedophile practices. The chairman recognized the familiar Vatican tactics of obstruction of justice, and identified them as mafia legal tactics.
Former Oklahoma Governor Frank Keating has resigned as head of a National Review Board looking into the Catholic Church sex scandal after serving only 1 year in that capacity. The contentious departure followed Keating's interview with the LA Times, where he compared some church leaders to La Cosa Nostra. In his resignation letter, Keating said, quote, "To resist grand jury subpoenas, to suppress the names of offending clerics, that is the model of a criminal organization."
At the same time, the Vatican was making public promises to reform its practices concerning child abuse. This priest, after having been charged with criminal sexual assault in Sao Paulo, was being reassigned to Annapolis. This priest was first accused of sexual abuse in 1991. He was reassigned 4 times after the first allegation. In each parish into which he was reassigned, the sexual abuses continued unabrupted. The bishop who appointed him to Annapolis knew he was facing criminal sexual assault charges in Sao Paulo. The priest moved in just 5 doors away from a single mother with a young boy. He offered to give her son guitar lessons. The mother recounts the horrible experiences which followed. She said her son woke her up one Sunday morning and told her he knew how to make love. She said she asked him, "What do you mean? You're only 5, you are so small, what are you talking about?" Then he recounted his experiences with the new Vatican priest. At school and in his neighborhood, the other children teased the child, nicknaming him, quote, "the priest's little wife," end quote. The experience left the child severely confused and depressed. He told his mother repeatedly that he just wanted to die. This was during the same time that Cardinal Ratzinger instructed all child abuse allegations be sent directly to the Vatican. At exactly the same time public promises are being made by the Vatican child abuse would stop. This child was being raped in Annapolis. Finally, the police in Annapolis arrested the priest. During their investigation they found his journal. In his journal he actually writes down notes about his plans to molest young boys. One of the notes in his journal stated that he used presents to seduce young boys. In exchange for these presents, he would ask them for sex. Repeating the same ancient practices found among the Nicolaitans from their very beginnings, documented in the New Testament, and practiced unabrupted by the Vatican up into our own modern era, as the quote, "secret of the Holy Office," end quote.
Web of intrigue that starts at our Holy of Holies, Boys Town, Nebraska, one of the most respected institutions in the United States, and spreads out like a spider web to Washington, D.C., right up to the steps of the nation's capital, the steps of the White House, involves some of the most respected and powerful and richest businessmen in this United States of America. And the centerpiece of the entire web is the use of children for sex and drug dealing and drug couriers, the compromising of politicians, the compromising of businessmen, but worst of all, the corruption of key institutions of government that have the duty and responsibility to make sure these things never happen.
World-famed Boys Town is in the news again.
Made famous by an Oscar-winning film, Boys Town, Nebraska is America's favorite children's charity. It was founded in 1917 by Father Edward Flanagan.
Spectacle in our social life is the neglected, unwanted, and unloved boy who has become a serious problem in our society.
With cash reserves of $500 million, Boys Town is the richest square mile in the world. It has been granted the privileges of an incorporated town, a Catholic diocese, and a school district for 500 boys and girls. 1/3 of its annual income is raised from public donations, solicited by begging letters and promotional videos.
I'm Father Belfield, caretaker of Father Flanagan's Stream and the executive director of Boys Town. Does Boys Town really exist, people ask me? You bet it does.
Located in the heartland of America, Boys Town youth have come from many backgrounds and locales.
For me, it was very clear that the case was not investigated and not pursued because of the alleged perpetrators.
Those perpetrators named by the children formed a ring of rich and powerful pedophiles in Omaha. Men from industry, politics, the media, even the police. On April the 11th, 1988, the Franklin Credit Union was raided and closed by the FBI. King was arrested, and a federal investigation showed he'd stolen $40 million from Franklin. But the FBI's inquiries were secret, and evidence of King's sex ring was quickly covered up. In November 1988, Nebraska's state government set up a parallel investigation into the Franklin financial collapse. A legislative committee was formed. Its chairman was the Republican head of Nebraska's banking committee, corn farmer and state senator Lawrence Schmidt. But the money trail led quickly to the original allegations of child abuse, and almost immediately anonymous threats began.
I received a phone call on the floor of the legislature. The caller did not identify himself, but he said, "Lauren, you do not want to have an investigation of the Franklin Federal Credit Union." And I asked who I was speaking to, and they said, "That doesn't matter, but you shouldn't have that investigation." And I said, "Well, why not?" He said, "It will reach to the highest levels of the Republican Party, and we're both good Republicans."
The night before we testified before the legislative committee, I did receive a phone call at home that said, "If you speak, you won't live to regret it."
But the thing that always bothered me, they claimed it was the largest male prostitution ring in the city that they've ever had uncovered. It was $1 million a year minimum.
Yeah.
And yet they only prosecuted the operator, Henry Vinson, and 3 of his lieutenants, as it were. They never went after any of the jobs, the clients. This operation, which was, again, quite large, claimed to have clients that ran from the White House to the Capitol Hill to the State House, to the churches, to the churches, to the churches, to the churches. Within the MIA, the mother lode was divided as credit card receipts and canceled checks, and then lists of the clients. The prosecutors knew all this stuff. There was approximately 20,000 pieces of 20,000 documents that they had. They sealed the entire record when they found out I was accessing.
Rick Romilly, the district attorney in Phoenix, Arizona, successfully prosecuted 8 pedophile priests. In the process, he also obtained a written confession from the local bishop in charge of the priests, admitting he knowingly and intentionally hid sexual criminal assault from the authorities.
I will tell you that the secrecy, the obstruction that I saw during my investigation was unparalleled in my entire career as a DA here in Phoenix, Arizona. It was so difficult to obtain any information from the church at all. In fact, we knew of certain meetings that had taken place, and yet no documentation was ever produced to be able to show that meeting had even occurred. When we started looking at it, it was really interesting. When we came across in the cans for the church that there are supposed to be secret archives to where this type of material is to be provided and not given to civil authorities, no matter what the circumstances. We had information that there was an instruction from the denuncio, who is an ambassador status, to ship all this, incriminating type of information to him, because under the law we could not subpoena that material because he would have protected status as an ambassador from the Vatican. I think that's really what the story is that the church's failure to acknowledge such a serious problem, but more than that, it is not a passiveness. It was an openly obstructive way of not allowing civil authorities to try to stop the abuse within the church.
Why hasn't the Catholic Church been prosecuted under the federal RICO laws of organized crime? Because it was set up to get the mafia. They're an organization that was involved in felony of covering it up. All the molestation and all that, those are felonies, and this is an organization involved in perpetrating those felonies. That's what the RICO laws were written for. Why have they not been charged?
It is pretty amazing that, in any other office in the country, if you just made a joke about kids, they'd come and put the cuffs on it.
It's just, but I would like to have that question answered. Why don't they fall under the federal RICO laws of organized crime? They're an organization involved in felonies, multiples, and they move people around to protect them, and all of that stuff. So,
is that we have been exposing the biggest corruption story in the history of the world.